Good morning, John. How are you?
Good morning, Hugh. I'm great.
John, tell me a little bit about the debate that you had with my guest from last hour, Elbridge Colby. I played some of the tape of my interview on Monday that wasn't heard on the air to set this up. Tell me about the debate you had.
Well, we decided that it was a good idea to have what we don't have in Washington enough, an open debate over a serious policy issue. And this has to do with whether support for Ukraine is antithetical to our defense of Taiwan and our deterrence of communist China. And he's been vocal. He has a book. He's got, as you know, you've talked to him extensively. He has a strong view on this, and I think he's wrong. And so I asked him to join me for a straightforward debate, and he was kind enough to do that, and we did that at Hudson, and I think it was a good opportunity to make arguments. I mean, we both of us are trying to help political leaders understand policy and make arguments, but political leaders, as you know, are constrained. They may not feel they can comfortably say things for political reasons. They're busy. So I think it's a good idea for us to not only pass talking points behind the scenes, I think it's important for us to show how these arguments play out in public. So that's what we did.
Now, John, the Hudson Institute is very serious about China. Mike Pompeo is your senior fellow. So you're very serious about China. But you were of the school that says we can do two things at one time. We can support Ukraine and we can get ready for China. Is that a fair summary of your position, the position of Captain Jerry Hendricks, who's often on this show as well?
Yeah. And yeah, we are serious. I mean, I will say I have been personally sanctioned by the Communist Chinese, as has Mike Pompeo, as has Miles Yu, who is the head of our China Center, and Hudson Institute as an institute has been sanctioned by the Communist Chinese. So we wear that with a badge of honor. I mean, it's nice to know people talk about impact in D.C. I call that impact. And so, we believe that, look, to put it simply, it should be clear to everybody. The Chinese Communists, Putin and Russia, and Iran are in an alliance. You cannot peel off part of that alliance and say, I just want to fight part of it and to expect to win. You have to treat them as a common threat because they are acting as a common threat. They are coordinating. They have said that publicly. They are acting in that way throughout the globe. And if we are myopic about this, or we don't see it, and if we falsely think we're too weak and we start to recede, we're going to get worse outcomes, and we're going to get our own security and a lot of other people's security damaged.
Now, John Walters, I think there's plenty of money to do both if the Congress will appropriate. Ken Calvert is chair of the Appropriations Defense Subcommittee. He thinks there's enough money to both arm Ukraine and solidify the Taiwanese defense. Do you believe so? And if so, what does that defense budget look like?
Well, again, I think also it's important to see these are two different kinds of wars and different kinds of weapon systems. To defend Taiwan, we need to project power, naval power, surface, undersea, space, air, and there is some ground part of it. But the Ukraine war is a ground war. And also, it's an American-supported war. No one expects Taiwan to be able to defend itself without direct commitment of U.S. forces on a much larger scale of a different kind of force. Look, 1,800 Stingers, several hundred Javelins, several hundred 31 Abrams tanks in Ukraine does not make or break the Ukraine defense. And what's important is, or the Taiwanese defense, and what's important here is we need to show that we are capable of catalyzing allies who will magnify our power in these regions to defend the interests that we have and the interests that they have. If we abandon them, we're alone. If we abandon them, we're not going to be defending Taiwan. If we let the Ukrainians fall and the Europeans become under the threat of both Russia and China. Russia on the global stage today is the junior partner, but the big junior partner of China. If they lose in Ukraine, China's ability to get allies in other parts of the world is weakened. The biggest single thing we can do for deterrence today is help the Ukrainians defeat the Russians. The much-vaunted Russian army is bogged down, it's stuck, and yes, it does cost us some money, but the basic thing that we need to beef up for Taiwan is naval power, space, cyberspace, and some of the new technologies I have part of Hudson works on, autonomous systems assisted by artificial intelligence, autonomous systems in the air, on the surface, and undersea. We can multiply the threat problem for the Chinese in a way that helps deterrence.
Now, John, there are a bunch of people driving to work this morning listening to you. And I keep trying to tell them it's 1937, maybe 1938. And most of them understand I'm referring to a period of time in which Winston Churchill was alone or surrounded by a half dozen people in Parliament. Neville Chamberlain wouldn't listen to him about the rising threat of Hitler. And in the entire volume of Alone, and I'm about 4/5 done listening to it. I've read it a couple of times. They don't talk about Japan at all. It's like Japan is a footnote on page 400 and that they were the same problem. They were part of the Axis. They talk a lot about Italy, but they make fun of Italy, sort of like Iran. We can make fun of Iran because they are the weakest sister of that trio. Is there any reason for you and Bridge to be in tension, for the Ukraine yes and the Taiwan yes people to be in tension? I don't think there is if we resolve to spend the money.
No, I said at the beginning of our debate, my goal in the debate was not to defeat Bridge Colby. He's a smart and able guy. I wanted to persuade him. I think that's a larger problem in the United States today, that we kind of shout epithets at each other. I want to persuade him that this is the way to think about it. And I'm going to continue to try to do that. I have smart people who are experts in some of these areas that I try to help to support, that are also trying to work with our Defense Department, with Congress, with the executive branch, and publicly to help people understand our hands aren't tied here. It's very strong. I actually don't think it's like the 1930s. I actually think it's a bit more of a blend of some of those dangers and the end of the Carter administration, the beginning of the Reagan administration, when the Soviets were on the march, where totalitarianism was expanding, where we needed to beef up our military, and it was not easy, as you know. You were there. And we use technology. We use technology to leap over the threats of our enemies. Again, the Chinese military is based on the backbone of Soviet-era weapons. They have upgraded some of them. They've modified some of them. Those weapons are losing big time in Ukraine. If you're the Chinese, you got to be looking at this and saying, I don't know whether this actually works as well as we thought it was going to work. And we need to show them that in spades.
Now, John, I want to push back a little bit because 1979, the Soviets invade Afghanistan. And there is a committee on the present danger, and Ronald Reagan is running for president. Everybody knows it's a Cold War, and that Afghanistan doesn't really hurt us, but it signals to us that they're not going to stop doing what they're doing in Poland or Eastern Europe or in Africa with the Cubans. This is different with China, because if Taiwan goes down, the world economy goes into a tailspin that makes the Great Depression look like a blip. It really will shatter, destroy markets. Isn't that why we ought to be more concerned about both Ukraine and China than we were about the Soviets marching into Afghanistan in 1979, Christmas Eve?
Yeah, I'm not saying that there isn't a blend. I said there's kind of a blend of the 30s and the late 70s. But it's also true that, the Soviets were pushing on Europe. And today, the tendency of people to say, well, we have to only focus on Taiwan, is to forget that 45 out of 50 U.S. states export more to Europe than they do to China. Europe is a huge economic partner. And also this talk about, well, China's going to get so wealthy and it's driving that wealth into an imperialist military. If you look at the actual GDP projections here, Russia, China, and Iran, their combined GDP is 1/3 of the U.S. and NATO, and if you take some of our allies in Asia. So
Japan and Australia,
money alone is going to kind of overwhelm us, and we have to get used to being dominated by the Chinese, is self-defeating and wrong. So, but those economies are going to be damaged. Now, there's transition going on here. You see this today with energy, but we changed the global relationships after the opening to China by saying we should go to where energy is cheapest. So we have Russia making Europe dependent. We have China making us dependent on things like batteries, solar panels, and other things. That's a mistake. We need to change our energy policy to be consistent with our national security. And we need to use energy to support our allies, not only in Europe, which is critical, but also in the developing world. We have an energy policy that alienates developing countries. We have the power both through our technology and our exports to make that'll be bigger than Belt and Road if we just stop being stupid here and start being smart.
We are stuck on stupid. John Walters is not. The Hudson Institute is not. Follow them. Follow John on Twitter. Get the Hudson Institute's work committee, the Select Chinese Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. Representative Mike Gallagher. I've got my Green Bay Packers hat on that Representative Gallagher made me wear when the rickety Aaron Rodgers beat the terrible and injury-plagued Cleveland Browns last year. But rickety Rodgers is gone. He's a Jet, thanks to the Cleveland Browns giving the Jets a second-rounder to trade for rickety Aaron Rodgers. Are you happy or sad, Congressman Gallagher?
Listen, it's the end of an era. I love Aaron Rodgers. He was an incredible quarterback. I think the trade worked out pretty well for us. We move up to 13. We get a 6-rounder, and we'll get another first-rounder if Rodgers plays at least 65% of the snaps, which he will in New York unless he gets injured. So I don't know. I think the trade worked out pretty well for us.
And you get the second rounder that the Browns sent. You get the second rounder that the Browns sent to the Jets for Elijah Moore. So it's basically the Browns helping out the Packers.
As you did last season, too, though we didn't take advantage of that help.
Right.
Screwed it up.
That's it. Let's go to the war game. I want to get to the war game.
Does the Browns come with the Browns bench? Does it come with the unluckiness of the Browns? The pick is
I'm not talking football now. I got to get to the real stuff. I just had John Walters on who said we can do Ukraine and China. I had Bridge Colby on Monday who said we can only do China. I don't care what you think about that. I want to know about the war game because I still don't know. I want you to just hold forth on what happened when the Select Committee played a war game.
PLA massed an invasion force and preemptively struck our positions on Okinawa and Guam, so deterrence failed. Through 6 days, we sunk 80 PLA ships in the Strait. That's a lot, largely thanks to our undersea capabilities and our long-range anti-ship missiles. But nevertheless, 80,000 PLA troops gained what's called a lodgment on the main island of Taiwan. They were able to get 80,000 troops on Taiwan despite that loss of their ships. We used up all of our best ammo, our long-range precision fires, within 1 week of fighting. I was also surprised at the extent to which economic and financial weapons were used, but U.S. economic sanctions, though they impose crippling costs on Chinese banks, many of our allies, even G7 partners, our closest allies, hesitated to join the sanctions regime. And then finally, though the Chinese losses were very heavy after 6 days, we were nowhere close to breaking the PLA's will to fight. And they were starting to use commercial ships to continue the invasion. Unfortunately, we only had 2 hours, so we couldn't go beyond 2 moves. But that was the basic summary of what happened in the game.
When you walked in, and it was run by the Center for New American Security, a very respectable group, and they're bipartisan, did you know what the CCP's first move would be?
I did not. Deliberately, I didn't want to game the game. I wanted there to be actual critical thinking. And Hugh, listen, there are obvious limits to what you can do in that short period of time, particularly when the players are busy and they're coming in from other stuff and you don't have time to do a lot of homework. But there's something about the format of just kind of having members around a map, having an interactive discussion that I actually thought afterwards stimulated more thinking than your standard congressional hearing where it's 5 minutes, scripted, this and that. And so I'm increasingly intrigued by the idea of using gaming or non-traditional fora like this to force a collaborative and creative discussion among members. And it's something I've said on your program quite frequently is in my 6 years on the Armed Services Committee, we've actually never had, even with the Indo-Pacific commander, just a no-holds-barred discussion around a map that just talked about kind of the basic geography at play here. And one thing I've been advocating for a while is for Congress to be brought into the DoD wargaming process. A final thought on gaming, Hugh. Again, despite its limits, I think it would be increasingly useful for Pentagon or defense-focused gamers to incorporate high-level people from Wall Street, from the financial and manufacturing community in order to tease out what's going to happen when we impose sanctions or when the Chinese start to weaponize supply chains. And these things tend to be separated. We tend not to incorporate the economic and financial dimensions of game.
Congressman, Mr. Chairman, I should call you, I would love for you and the committee to do a Saturday, Sunday game and go actually run two with two different opening moves. And I would expand CNES. I would add in Jerry Hendricks and maybe the Hudson Institute and have 3 or 4 people playing the red team, the CCP team, because that's a very bold opening move. What did they do? They struck us. They went to war. They preemptively struck the Okinawa base and what is it? Yakuza and not Yakuza. That's a crime thing. I can't remember the air base in Japan. They struck the Japanese air base
They struck Guam. They struck Guam, and they struck Okinawa. You know, it's interesting. In games I've played previously, they've struck our positions in Hawaii. There were also cyber attacks against domestic infrastructure on the U.S. homeland. You know, one of the big takeaways is that Las Vegas rules won't apply. What happens in the Taiwan Strait won't stay there. It will quickly escalate. This was also something that happened in the war game we did with the Republican conference with Admiral Mark Montgomery and the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, and as well as Ben Jensen from the Center for Strategic and International Studies. So we're going forward. We're going to try and do a few different ones of these. I know various think tanks have their own version of games. Interestingly enough, if you talk to former Speaker Gingrich, his argument is that Congress used to have its own organic wargaming capability that was located at the National Defense University, but was a dedicated space where Congress could actually routinely play games. It could be interesting if you revived a version of that. And think whenever we have a big executive or a Wall Street asset manager coming to visit us in D.C., imagine if you ran them through an hour and a half of a game. I think they would tend no longer to discount the likelihood or the cost of a deterrence failure across the Taiwan Strait. And I recently met with one of the leading asset managers in America, and he said there's a near zero probability of Xi Jinping invading Taiwan. And I was dumbfounded. My jaw hit the floor. I think that's almost a dereliction of fiduciary responsibility. If that's how you're thinking about this.
Chairman Gallagher, did your Democratic colleagues give a reaction similar to your Republican colleagues, or was it different? Did they dispute this opening sentence? How did they respond?
You know, I think the major difference was after the game in terms of what do we do going forward. And we're going to have a policy discussion tonight. It'll be a closed-door policy discussion, but we're going to have Admiral Mark Montgomery and some other experts to guide us in order to identify what are the things we can do to enhance near-term deterrence. I think that on the Democratic side, it's fair to say they're prioritizing the idea of engagement as a successful way to diffuse this crisis. Whereas, and I'll only speak for myself, you know, I was reading Secretary Yellen's speech, which was all about how we need to engage with the CCP, we need to engage with China to promote peace. And I thought, well, we've tried engagement for 2 decades and it's failed. So the idea that we're just going to engage harder and that engagement is somehow going to amount to deterrence, I don't believe that. So I think that being said, I think there's agreement on the idea that, of course, we should have some sort of crisis communication channel where our military people can pick up the phone if things are heating up and say, hey, let's avoid some miscommunication. But here's the thing, Hugh, and this gets to the engagement hypothesis and why it continues to fail. We've actually tried for the last 5 years to reestablish such a channel, and the Chinese refuse to meet us halfway. And right now, it seems like the Biden administration is chasing Chinese officials around the world, desperately trying to have a meeting. They are what Matt Turpin has called an ardent suitor for a meeting with the CCP, hoping that engaging just for the sake of engagement will produce positive results. So I think that's one meaningful difference that I see between the parties. And of course, my bias is that only hard power deters. That's the best form of communication, to put hard
I wish
power
you could get your Democratic colleagues to do what I've been rereading alone, the second volume in the Manchester biography of Churchill. It's from 1932 to 1939. In it, Manchester says of Neville Chamberlain, no one could shake his faith in appeasement, not even Adolf Hitler. And I had to write that down and look it up because no matter what Hitler did, Neville Chamberlain just thought it was a question of price. He really just thought, what does he need? He's a mercurial guy. We can make him happy. Let's not make him angry. Let's keep him happy. And he was wrong. It led to World War. I don't know if your colleagues are, but Joe Biden certainly is an apostle of modern day appeasement. Now it's a dirty word. It wasn't in the 30s. It was an ideology that was embraced and believed. And people talked about, I'm an appeaser, and it wasn't a dirty word. Well, I think Joe Biden is an appeaser, and Tony Blinken is an appeaser, and they're not even good at appeasing because they can't get the meeting to give anything away.
Well, I think one mistake we make, and really these were the mistakes leading up to the failure of deterrence in Ukraine, is that Western officials, U.S. officials, particularly those in power now, tend to mirror image. We sort of foist our set of values onto brutal dictators like Putin and Xi, and we assume that they are rational actors, that somehow they're sitting there calculating the economic utility of making this or that move. As I look at Xi Jinping, of course, he, takes financial considerations into account, but he's also a profoundly ideological actor. And he's acting out this form of sort of grievance politics and sort of an attempt to redeem China for, a century of humiliation that is not really rational if you think about it. And I think that's a mistake we often make, and it's a very dangerous mistake to make. And even if these actors are facing enormous economic and demographic headwinds, it could make them more dangerous in the short term as they attempt to do things in order to distract their populace from the very real problems that they've imposed upon their own citizens. So we have to be very careful about mere.
Are they rational as a dictator is rational, say like Hitler or like Putin? They have a vision. They act rationally according to their vision, but they're not rational in Western terms. I think that's a different deal because I think Xi is very cold-blooded. He's just got, you got to stick around for another segment if you want to answer that. We can't even talk.
Rational in the sense of if they probe with bayonets, if they find steel, they stop. If they find mush, they push. That level of dictator rationality is at play.
That's where they are. Representative Gallagher, congratulations on the Browns helping out your Packers. Thank you for joining me. I finally know what happened in the war game. Don't go anywhere, America. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. New Hampshire has a population of 1.4 million people. It has 152,000 businesses. It has an $84 billion GDP. And for the last 5 years, 2017 to 2022, it has grown at an annualized rate of 2.5%. That's a heck of a record. Governor Chris Sununu has been the CEO of that state for most of those 5 years. He joins me again. Welcome back, Governor Sununu. Good to talk to you.
Hey, Hugh. How we doing, brother?
I'm great. Now, when you go on the Sunday shows, does anyone ever preface it by telling them the New Hampshire story about your economic miracle up there?
Who doesn't know about the Sununu economic miracle? I don't know. Look, I don't know, man. I go on the shows. They ask their questions. I tell it like it is. I don't know. I'm almost to a fault. I think I'm a kind of an open book. I've come off a couple of those interviews before. My staff is like, wow, you really said it. So I don't know. I don't think about it too much. My job is just to take care of the state. I think it's a great model. We got a great state. It's all about less government. I mean, it really.
I'm going to talk to you about. I spent a lot of the year in Maine, and I go buy my liquor in New Hampshire. But Maine's got an estate tax, so I don't want to die there. I keep telling Susan Collins and Angus King, nobody wants to die in Maine. Do you have an estate tax in New Hampshire?
Hell no. What is that? Can you define that term for me? No. We have no millionaire's tax, no estate tax. I got rid of the 5% interest and dividends tax. By January, it goes to zero. No, January of 25 goes to zero. Gone. No sales tax, no income tax.
So how do you pay for the troopers? Because they're always there waiting to get me. They're always around.
Ranked best roads in America, best state police in America. Look, we have a kind of an average of what you call a business profits tax here. And most of the taxes, if you pay anything at all as an individual, it's only property tax. Now, it's high, of course it is, unfortunately, but you control it, right? You go to town meeting every year. You say what your curriculum is in the schools, who's going to be hired, what the teachers' contracts will be, what roads will be paved. It's all local. So as a voter, you have complete control over how your dollars are spent, as opposed to sending it into some, black box at the state or up at the federal level and hoping it works out, which, as we know, it rarely does at the federal level. So, no, our model is, I think, quite brilliant. We really stuck to what the founding fathers envisioned, and it works really well. And yeah, we're ranked not just economically successful. We're now ranked number one, the most efficient government in the country. And I'm an engineer by trade. That is the best metric I could possibly get. Most efficient government means you're getting the best programs for the dollars you put in. And so, look, we're rocking it up here, and there's a model to be shared across the country.
Look, you're no Ohio, but you haven't got a Great Lake full of fresh water, but you're close. You're close. So, Governor Sununu, tell me about the ability of the state to attract new business, because you're dealing with a climate that's different than Virginia's, where Glenn Youngkin has got the sticky fingers on, or Texas, where Greg Abbott has the sticky fingers on, or Ohio, where they got Intel. How do you get new businesses up there?
Well, look, I mean, the trick isn't just being lucky, but let's face it. In New Hampshire, we have a saying: if I run into a bear in the forest, I don't need to outrun the bear. I just need to outrun the idiot next to me. In New Hampshire, that's the rest of New England, because economically, these guys are raising taxes, do everything they can to chase business out, and we are the safe haven. If you want to be a business in the Northeast, you want to be in New Hampshire. There's just no question about it. The only state growing in population, the only state that has a chance at providing workforce. So then you just kind of take that local control model. We deregulate. We get out of your way. We let you do you, right? It's a little thing called live free or die. It's not just 4 cool words on a license plate. It is truly how we govern here. So I think we just have a very pro-business model, and it's that simple. If the economy does well, then the government.
And we often see on television the big urban centers in the big states are just rife with crime. I'm in D.C. a lot. It's a very dangerous place right now. And Chicago is a dangerous place. L.A. and San Francisco long ago became dangerous place. What is the crime rate in Manchester and Keene? And we're on right now, so they'll know if you're shining them on. We're on in Manchester and Keene. What is the crime rate up there?
Well, look, I can't tell you what the crime rate is off the top of my head. I can tell you we were ranked one of the safest states in the country, right? So I can tell you that. We are far and away one of the safest places to be. I think Maine and Vermont actually have good ratings in terms of safety as well. So it's kind of generally a safe part of the country. But look, when it comes to the inner city, the issue is homelessness. The issue is undiagnosed mental health. And you go to a place like San Francisco or Los Angeles, you can't blame a single Republican for a single one of the policies that have created an abject humanitarian disaster for those individuals. I used to live in San Francisco like 20 years ago, and I went back. It's so bad. It's sad. It isn't just, this is a political nightmare for Gavin Newsom. It is really sad. It's gut-wrenching to see the inhumanity, the indignity that the bad policies of the left have created for these people. We have the lowest poverty rate in the country, the lowest by far.
Wow.
I work really hard at it, Hugh, really, really hard to make sure that not that the government is just taking care of you, right? Because we just said it's not about the government, but we're creating doors of opportunity for folks. And they have opportunity to move forward. We have opportunity to get mental health. I mean, 8 to 9 out of 10 homeless people have some sort of undiagnosed or diagnosed mental health issue. So by taking care of that, you really take care of a lot of the problem, and you get them back into the workforce, and it promotes the economy. You know, we have recovery-friendly workplaces. Just because you're dealing with drugs doesn't mean you're not in the workforce here. So we have all these pieces that are moving to make sure opportunities created.
You know, Governor Newsom, you mentioned him. He's a very smart guy, very telegenic. And if President Biden bows out, as I think he eventually will because he's too old, I expect Gavin to run and to get the nomination. Do you think he's responsible for the homeless problem or a partner in that? I do, but I just want to know whether you think he's responsible.
Of course. Look, the former mayor of San Francisco, right, the lieutenant governor, the guy who's only been in government and had his finger on the control switches, and that could create opportunity for those individuals for like 20 years now, he's done nothing. In fact, his policies have gone in the opposite direction. Hugh, this is an issue. Homelessness is an issue that I think Republicans need to go take from the Democrats, because I'll put my policies against Gavin Newsom's any day, right? My policies of economic success and opportunity against that humanitarian nightmare any day of the week. And again, you just can't blame a single Republican in California for any of that. He has to own it. And there's no way he's going to dodge it. I know he's arrogant and he thinks he's got a decent haircut, so that'll get him by. But at the end of the day, people want to know what you're doing about some of the biggest crises in America. And they want results, leaders that bring results. And that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity for governors and mayors and folks that have driven successful models around this issue to really take it head on, whether it's Biden or and I'm with you, by the way. I don't think Biden's going to be the nominee. I don't think it's going to happen.
Expand on that. Expand on why you think that and what happens.
Well, you just said it could 25% chance it's a health reason and he bows out. 25% chance Gavin just says, the heck with you. I'm coming to New Hampshire because Biden's not going to be here. I'm going to get on the ground. I'm going to be a viable candidate on day one. I'm going to charge. And 75% of America doesn't want Biden to run again. Most Democrats don't want Biden to run again. So the door is just too big and too wide open. And then once a viable candidate gets in, the DNC is going to have to, this idea that they're not going to have a debate. Are you kidding me? No way. They're going to have to renege on that. So I think folks understand, even Democrats understand, if it's just Joe Biden, a vote for Joe Biden is really allowing Kamala Harris to be president, unfortunately, because God bless the old guy. There's a fear he's not going to be there, for the full next 5 years, right? So Democrats understand that. They're trying to say, thank you for your service, move on. I just think there's too many doors of opportunity, if you will, for Democrats to seize on, and they don't respect the guy.
Look, there's not only a fear that he won't be there. There's not only a fear that he won't be there. There's a reality he's not there most of the day. I mean, he's just, he's an old guy. He's an old guy.
He ain't getting younger. It ain't getting better. And I said, I was at this thing in New York City yesterday, and someone said, is Joe Biden too old? And I said, look, I'm not going to put a number on it, but let's face it. Joe Biden ran for president like 5 or 6 times until he just wore America out. We said, oh, my God, let's give it to the guy, right? So he didn't earn it, really. He just wore us out. And you can't say we're getting the best Joe Biden. You were getting this, really the worst version of the guy, unfortunately, so for America. So it is what it is. And I think the left wing that doesn't respect him, right? I make the joke, but it's true. What does the left wing elite in Washington say behind Joe Biden's back? Well, they say exactly what they said to his face in those debates, that he was an old, out-of-touch, rich white guy that didn't represent the future of the Progressive Socialist Party. So they don't respect him. They don't like that he's there. He's just a placeholder. I think someone's going to seize on the opportunity quicker than people appreciate.
I agree with that. Now, the South Carolina Democratic Party said they're going first. I believe your state law obliges your Secretary of State to set the New Hampshire primary 2 weeks before the South Carolina primary. What I'm unclear on is whether that applies to both Republicans and Democrats. So everyone will vote on the same day. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yep, we're going first. And by the way, is South Carolina really going to have a primary? No. They're going to, like they did with Trump in 2020. Republicans in South Carolina in 2020 said, okay, Trump's the winner. And they're going to do the exact same thing with Joe Biden. They're just going to try to deem him the winner so he doesn't have to get on the round and campaign. So they've effectively tried to move the first in the nation primary to a state that will likely not even hold a primary. And by the way, we're going first anyway.
I know that.
Opportunity.
Now, I want to ask you, what is the last date at which you can decide whether or not you want to be on that ballot for the GOP presidential primary?
Me personally?
Yes.
Well, I guess you could get in the middle of the fall after debates have already taken place, as long as you're meeting the debate criteria guidelines and you get on the ballot. So there's not like a fixed date everyone has to get in by. But practically speaking, if you want ballot access, if you want to be sure you're on all the ballots, you probably got to make moves this summer because you want to be on that debate stage, and you probably need 6 months to dot the I's and cross the T's to make sure you're on the ballots in all the states you want to be on. So I think just for practical speaking, if you get in late in the fall, you just can't do that really because it takes time to get ballot access. It's very different for every state and very complicated.
When you look at the field that is thus far emerged, the former president, Governor DeSantis, Governor Ambassador Haley, Senator Scott, Vivek Ramaswamy, and there might be 2 or 3 others, including you. Who would you support if you do not get in?
Oh, I don't know. I'm going to support someone. If I don't get in, I'm not going to sit it out. Like that's not in my. I'll endorse someone. I'll get behind someone. I tend to lean towards governors and mayors and executive CEOs, people with real executive level experience. So I'm not sure. I think everyone's kind of waiting to see what happens on that debate stage. Maybe I'll be there. I'm hoping I'll be there. But I think at the end of the day, first, are we going to have debates? I mean, we're going to have debates, but Trump says he ain't showing up. I don't know what that's all about. So I think that's taking everybody a bit by surprise. He's kind of wimping out. He says he's a fighter, but now he doesn't want to actually have discussions and debate. So it'll be interesting to see where that all falls.
Hey, we got 30 seconds, Governor. We got 30 seconds. You just said, I hope I'm going to be there.